Hello, greetings and welcome, my dear listeners. My name is Heretical Hatter, and I welcome you to this episode of my little series, The Tau Empire Reimagined. And today's subject of our little story is the first age of security, the very beginning of 40th millennium for the coalition. In the last episode, you heard of changes that happened after the victory in the Fifth Coalition War, how long their construction and the decision to officially end the third sphere of expansion lasted. And now we are entering a new age, an age of security, when the coalition decided to cease their expansion, at least outward expansion, and focus on build-up within current borders. I am sure that the kind nature of 40k Galaxy won't do anything to make the first age of security be an ironic name. I'm sure of it. I'm sure. Well then, without further mumbling from my side, let's get straight to the episode. The 40th millennium is a difficult era for coalition. In their calendar, the 40th millennium lasted from 5023rd year of Era of Unity all the way to 6249. After victory in the Fifth Coalition War, the massive losses in the war against the orcs and crazed chaos mutants, the future of coalition and greater good was far from certain. Internal reforms limited the power of the Ethereals and expanded the abilities of communication and transport throughout the void. It was age of political deals, but also internal growth, both in terms of technology and industry. The bloody lessons of the Fourth and especially the Fifth War allowed to reform the coalition military in full, allowing for great progress in terms of military technology. It was also age of steady colonization and progress, especially creation of massive void habitats, some of which being big enough to be considered worlds. In fact, those giant projects or mega projects, especially ginormous space stations, would be a staple for this age. This will be most characteristic part of this period of time. When the 39th millennium was an age of war and great losses for a coalition, the 40th was one of almost continuous golden age. One that had many moments of darkness and hopelessness, but overall, the power of the coalition wasn't broken, or coalition itself wasn't wounded in this period of history as much as in the previous millennia. This was truly the age of wonders for the coalition. And it began with the first age of security. First age of security lasted from the very first year of the 40th millennium all the way to 679th year of millennium 40. The Tau calendar, it would be 5023rd year to 5855th year of era of unity. An age that lasted over 800 Tau years and almost 700 Terran years. So not a short period in the coalition history. In this time, the coalition didn't expand their borders. Fear of the next Orc War made the coalition rethink their strategy. With Ether Relays system, there was a need to ensure stable FTL communication throughout the coalition. As such, those 832 Tau years were spent creating stable and reliable Ether Relay system throughout the coalition, as well as creation of numerous space stations, defense platforms, listening stations, and new colonies. Continent-sized space stations were the most symbolic part of this age. Dozens and dozens of continent-sized space stations were built around the coalition space. Mechanical rings were built around major sept worlds to allow even greater growth of industry. Entire moons were hollowed out for the sake of resources, and many dead systems had a major space station established for the sake of mining there. Additionally, a great number of worlds were added to the coalition. All those worlds were within existing coalition borders. The laws or the take on how to colonize worlds changed. In those 800 years, the coalition established only 4 new septs with around 24 proper colonies and mandates. But this wasn't all that was claimed. Because next to those colonies and mandates and septs were dozens of outposts that were established all around the coalition, boosting the general production for numerous worlds. In fact, number of those outposts was so great that for every sept world and colony, coalition established at least 3 new outposts. This was a golden age for colonization, which was connected to numerous widespread terraforming projects, ensuring that newly established worlds would have dedicated outposts and systems that could supply them with resources and food. An age of impressive industrial growth by all accounts. The orcs were still a constant, although not as overwhelming threat. But with lessons of previous orc wars learned, coalition kept significant military force ready to answer any danger. There were even ideas to create AI-controlled army, but with knowledge of some older species about a certain cybernetic revolt, those ideas were struck down. Coalition military would remain in great part, alive and made of flesh, living flesh. New weapons and protection systems that were developed during the Fifth Coalition War, but for example didn't have enough founding or were too experimental to be deployed on the battlefield, now had time to be fully developed and properly produced. For example, one of the interesting weapons that was created in this period were the very first Titan killing weapons. Of course, those weapons were designed to destroy Orc Gargants, because the Tau made contact with Orcs, and Orcs do make their own Titans from time to time, and the Coalition did develop the very first weapons that were designed to take down those massive, gigantic machines of war. They didn't create any direct counter because they saw this as, well, inefficient. In their mind, only Orcs were mad enough to create something as ludicrous as a Gargant or a Titan. And with how Orc technology works, they knew that as long as Mech-Boys and their workshops were working, the Gargants would be, well, created again and again from scrap. So they were more focused on creating a good Gargant killing weapon without creating something that could be, well, direct counter to the Gargants. Especially because they already had the Vork, who are Titan-sized Xenos. If there was to be a melee combat with a Gargant, the Vork was more than well prepared and equipped by nature to take one down. In the same period of time, Zoats silently worked in the shadows, or sometimes loudly on the stage, promoting greater good religious cults. Their old plan to create a warp entity that could fight against chaos gods was still in motion. This time they simply changed from the two-faced god of the original faith to the greater good. With more moderate factions of ethereals in power at the time, they accepted that without much of opposition. As long as this type of faith followed general ideas of the greater good, they were fine with that. It's important to remember that even though the Tau themselves are godless, they don't have a god, they are spiritual, and they do have a lot of rituals and symbolism in their culture. So even though this wasn't ideal for the ethereals, it was better than making too much problem out of it. Coalition did manage to establish contact with few xenospecies, although they didn't attempt to integrate them into the Tauva coalition. Most did agree for a trade or anti-orc pact where they cooperated against the orc menace if it rose up anywhere. But the decision that the coalition wouldn't expand their territory outside of what they had at the time was kept in place. The coalition was fully focused on internal development. Speaking of diplomacy, the relations with Sion Empire remained warm and positive for a very long time, until around 300 M40, when Sion Empire started becoming more and more radical with their beliefs. Their belief in the God of Progress managed to reach into the coalition and establish itself in pockets on some colonies, or even among some of the commanding officers of the ground forces and the navy. But with existing religious tolerance at the time, the coalition didn't really think that much of it, especially because Sion Empire was, well, an ally. However, this faith started to becoming more and more deranged, to the point that Coalition High Council decided to officially ban it. This was the very first faith or organized religion that Coalition was accepting for a very long time, and then banned. So this was something new. But people started to feel that something was wrong and something bad was going to happen. With this ban, the Sion Empire broke both trade deal and defensive alliance. The Sitorian monarchy narrative started getting more and more warlike, with Watercast unable to do anything to stop upcoming disaster, no matter what they did. Some people believe that this was all caused by one deranged monarch or the most radical part of a cult and the faith that was dominating the Sion Empire. They were wrong. All this were just preludes and first signs of the horror to come. In the grim darkness of the Milky Way galaxy, even in chaos, there are patterns. Some that cannot be avoided. That's exactly why, exactly 666 Terran years after the first pulse, the second great pulse emanated out from the broken heart. 816 Tau years have passed, and here it happened once again. In 323 Millennium 40 or 5418, very close to the middle of the age of security, the second pulse caused a chaos throughout the coalition. Just like in case of the first pulse, vessels in transit were forcibly pulled out of the ether, and even ethercom system was disturbed for a few hours. And while surprising and shocking for many, the first pulse was well recorded, so it didn't really took that much time for people to figure out that the second global anomaly, this pulse, happened. And relatively quickly, everything gets back to normal. Or well, that's what it looked like for a few days. The coalition did recognize the pulse for what it was and went into high alert. However, despite preparations and scouting, everyone expected another mad attack of cultists or orcs. Everyone expected attack from without, not within. As one, numerous illegal secret cults went on a killing spree or starting uprisings and rebellions against the coalition government. All, without exception, were connected to the cult of the God of Progress of Sion Empire. As those cults started to spread terror and confusion, as some vessels were overtaken by those mad cultists and opened fire on, well, vessels that were friendly just minutes ago, the Sion Empire began their attack on the coalition. The second pulse, marked with the symbol of a dark prince of pleasure, the god of perfection that corrupted the mind of Cesaurians and their desire for progress and perfection, was the moment when the Sixth Coalition War began. as it turned out, the name Age of Security didn't promise as much security as many hoped it would. Sixth Coalition War, 323 to 353 Millennium 40, or 5418 to 5454 Era of Unity. By the time of the Sixth Coalition War, Sion Empire grew in size from 40 to 66 worlds. 6 being, of course, the sacred number of Slaanesh. For a long time, they were close allies to the coalition, but with passing of centuries, their desire for perfection grew to obsession and Citorians into total zealots. Their faith into God of Progress expanded into coalition space and was tolerated for a very long time, until few decades prior, as I said, it was banned for its extremist ideals. The Sion Empire was always technologically advanced and had a good military. After all, despite their small size, they were a good ally for the coalition during the Fifth Coalition War. And now, they were coalition's enemy. And they showed that, despite the passage of years, they didn't get any weaker. In the initial moment of the war, the coalition had to face not only with murderous cults and corrupted officials, commanders, and strange cyber viruses that were wrecking the defense systems and communication systems throughout the entire western region of the coalition, but also a massed Sion Empire attack with both naval and ground forces. Of course, Sion Empire was significantly smaller than the coalition. At the time of the war, they were around 7 times smaller than the coalition. But with number of rebels, cultists and madmen, as well as rogue fleets and the efficiency that Citorians managed to push into the coalition space, it took 3 whole years for coalition to stop Citorian's continuous advance into coalition space. Their advance was relatively slow, and they didn't manage to achieve some kind of great devastating victory, but their raids and attacks were reaching far into the coalition space. Septs of Vetaura, Seanoi, and Heiuta of Old Council space were under attack. The major worlds of Centra, the same people that were surrounded by orcs for 25 years, were under attack once again, and in the region of space where the greater density of those mad cultists. In most battles, however, the coalition managed to hold the line. In fact, during those 3 years, only 6 worlds were captured by the Sion Empire, and all of them were relatively minor colonies. Some were even freshly established outposts. And while the number of worlds that were lost to the Citorians was relatively small, over 24 worlds were under attack by the Sion Empire ground forces, which spread the coalition response on the quite wide front. It took far longer than expected to take down cultists who were wrecking the logistics lines and communications with the rest of the coalition. But with major coalition fleets finally entering the region, the Citarians were being slowly pushed back, being forced to change their tactics from direct assault to raiding and infiltration of the back lines. Despite numerical advantage on the side of the coalition, thanks to Sion Empire using warp drive, viruses and very confusing style of warfare, as well as most likely good number of informants within the coalition ranks themselves, the war within the coalition borders, in the name of defending their colonies and people, lasted exactly 6 years, 6 months, and 6 days since the coalition main force arrived and managed to stop the Citarian advance. And, dear listeners, you must understand that fighting Citarians was very hard. The Sion Empire had more advanced stealth technology and speed on their side thanks to the warp drives. With cultists, they had ability to, have eyes and ears in many places within the coalition. Additionally, all of their people were cyborgs, quite heavily augmented, which meant that each individual Citarian soldier was far more dangerous than a standard soldier of a coalition. The coalition had difficulty gathering enough forces to launch a proper attack without being targeted and destroyed or forced to a retreat by the enemy. Some believed that the Citarians had some psychers but could see into the future, most likely their dark god, giving them ability to predict where the coalition forces would gather, so they could strike at them before the coalition would gather enough forces to attack. Those 6 years was of constant running around in circles. It was irritating for coalition commanders. But thanks to coalition determination, Sion Empire lost great portion of their forces and couldn't continue their raids. Slowly but surely, the coalition managed to push them out. When coalition finally managed to strike into Sion Empire territory, they were terrified. Their world became centers of debauchery, torture, and cybernetic horror. Citarians that were captured were completely mad, their biological and cybernetic minds both being corrupted by desire to cause pain and suffering and seeking perfection. Coalition official statement was that some kind of experiment had to corrupt both Citarian DNA and their cybernetics, ensuring that entire population was consumed by this type of madness. Unofficially, the psychers of the coalition informed High Coalition Council that the chaos corruption, the demon corruption most likely, took over minds of all of Citarians, turning the entire population into mad chaos cultists. And all those suffering, the slaves they took, wasn't without purpose. The Citarians were clearly attempting to summon demons, greater demons. Specifically, a greater demon of Slaanesh, known as Shaper of Bone and Iron. This creature of darkness was being summoned by the Citarians. Coalition knew that they had to stop it in any way possible, but in first ground battles on the Sion Empire territory, they suffered great losses. For one single reason. the coalition wasn't fighting only Sion Empire military. The entire population, every man, woman, child, and things in between, were corrupted to their very core. If coalition suffers too great losses, if Sitorians manage to call for this dark entity, the very region of space, entire sector, could be endangered, with a great possibility that Sion Empire would be successful in opening a warp rift and calling upon a greater demon, or maybe multiple greater demons. Coalition High Council approved the most efficient operation to bring end to this menace. Total annihilation. Surprisingly, Coalition didn't need much time or effort to convince the general population that genocide was required, as the scale of cruelty of Sitorians was revealed to the public. Sitorians hoped that the fate of the slaves, the prisoners they took in the years that were ravaging the Coalition space would, start panic throughout the Coalition. They were mistaken, because on the side of those horrors, this terror, thanks to the narration of Watercast, this fear was transformed into cold rage. Sitorians were lost. Due to the virus of unknown origins, they grew mad and were beyond saving. To keep everyone safe, and in the name of a greater good, they had to be destroyed. The campaign of annihilation took 20 years. Despite their losses, Sitorians still had some fleets and defenses. They had colonies that weren't on official maps, or the maps Coalition possessed weren't showing proper worlds. It was a grinding and cruel campaign. Some worlds were deemed worthy of capture or securing, and Coalition had to pay great price to capture any world or moon, as basically all Sitorians became deranged murderers. Men, women, children, clones that they started to produce, chaos, corrupted machines of terror. It was a horror. Although information about it was struck from official records, it was during this campaign that Coalition first time faced demons. However, it is important to note that despite how long this campaign took, no greater demon appeared in this period of time. Normal, standard demons, even some bigger ones, did appear, but not one greater demon, including the greater demon that was corrupting Sitorians from the beginning, managed to show up. At least this is stated in the documents given to the highest officers and members of the Coalition who learn about this conflict. It was also in this period of time that Tau created machines that could wipe out memories or force information out of captives. Entire armies were mind-wiped so that they could return to normal style of living. Some of those soldiers couldn't even do so with that help. Prolonged exposure to cultists and demons causing many to go mad, beyond even Coalition technology to help. Those soldiers were killed, officially being marked as victims of the war. Out of 66 worlds of Sion Empire, only 12 were captured and purified, silently being prepared for future colonization. Another 8 worlds were captured, but due to the discoveries on the surface, it was decided that their destruction was more optimal than allowing them to persist. Remaining 46 worlds were destroyed, either from the get-go or after discovering of the depths of the corruption during the campaigns on the surface. It was kept secret, but some of those worlds were getting close to becoming demon worlds and opening warp rifts in real space, big enough for, to invite major chaos forces into this sector of space. This was the very first time in Coalition history when they used a world cracker weapons against enemy forces, ripping the planets apart and leaving them dead forever. 6 worlds were cracked. All of them were core worlds of Sion Empire, including their capital. They were totally beyond saving. Those were the worlds that were the closest to becoming demon worlds. Their population fusing with the surface, with demons, with architecture, with technology. Imagine a planet that was slowly becoming alive due to Slaaneshi corruption, fusing rock, steel, machine, bone and flesh. 8 were used to test bioweapons developed during the 5th Coalition War. Some were targeting only living things, some were targeting all that was on the planet, transforming entire atmosphere into acidic mixture that ate everything before being ignited and burned. 14 worlds had their atmosphere ignited with experimental weapons. All life burned away. Remaining 18 were glassed from orbit. And as I said, officially Coalition didn't face greater demons during this war. Those are reports that are available to the highest members of the Coalition. However, it is important to note that the Coalition did deploy a great number of battle psychers in this war. Specifically, Domati and Zoats. Both species had very potent psychers, especially in terms of battle psychers, and those 2 species had amazing natural resistance to the powers of chaos. Of course, other psychers were deployed alongside them, but those 2 forces were, the main deployment. And it's important to note that in some battles, a great number of them died. So although official records, the secret official records, don't state that, there is a high possibility that Zoats and Domati sacrifice dozens, if not hundreds, of the best battle psychers they had on hand to defeat greater demons of Slaanesh that did manage to enter real space within Sion Empire. It's hard to tell if the truth ever will be discovered. The only truth that matters, however, is that Sion Empire and Citorians were no more. Full genocide, total annihilation. 12 worlds secured, 46 turned into ruins, into dust, into glassed, dead worlds. The ideology of the greater good, of peace, unity and prosperity had its limits, and when endangered, there are few things that Coalition wouldn't do in the name of a greater good, in the name of protecting their empire. The victory in the Sixth Coalition War brought some changes to the Coalition, as one could suspect. First thing that must be discussed is the fate of Sion Empire territories. Coalition didn't settle the region of Sion Empire, at least not for now. The decision that they would not expand their borders was still in effect, and the surprise attack of Sion Empire proved that they weren't half as prepared for expansion as some wanted to believe. The 12 worlds that they captured were secured and were fully abandoned, but they weren't colonized. But the plans for future expansion and establishment of Sept in the region was, put in place. Due to the presence of the orcs and fears that they would fill up the void left by the Sion Empire, that was, quite important in keeping eye on the local orc population, the Coalition established listening posts, outposts and refueling stations within old Sion Empire territory. The entire region was occupied by the Coalition and mostly given under control of the Coalition Navy that was tasked in patrolling this region of space and making sure that no orcs would swoop in and take over the region, and more importantly that whatever dark powers that were influencing Sion Empire for a very long time wouldn't try to return to the region despite the death of the cultists. The next great change was regulating the religion, the faith of the Coalition. With the end of Sixth Coalition War, the matter of cults that turned against the Coalition within their own borders and caused a lot of damage, as well as a fate of zealots of the Sion Empire, ensured greatest change in the Coalition history. In the past, there was general religious freedom within the Coalition. As long as this faith wasn't against the ideas of the greater good. Now, religious institutions were regulated and controlled. People could only choose religions that were officially approved by the Coalition, and all religions were put under influence of the leaders of the Coalition, becoming more and more aligned with the ideology of the greater good. Many gods and cults being connected to the concept of different castes and the role of the society, as well as general ideology of the greater good. Yes, my darlings, the idea that the Tau Empire in canon has religious freedom is idiotic, especially with how many cults exist that worship chaos, even when they aren't fully aware they're doing so. The Sixth Coalition War changes that scenario, that vision that Games Workshop had for the Tau Empire, and one of the biggest differences between the Tau Empire and Tauva Coalition. There are many different faiths within the coalition, many different cults, but every single one are in one way or the other connected to the greater good. There are, for example, gods of war in some religions, but those are connected to the idea of the fire caste, the warriors who protect in the name of a greater good of a whole. There are cults that talk about exploration, and that is connected to the air or water caste, the diplomats and the void pilots. This is also connected, of course, to the slow creation of a certain goddess within the warp. Because who said that a god needs to be born out of only one type of faith or one type of religion? As long as all cults follow a certain ideas that are very similar to one another, they would connect to one another within the warp, allowing a certain entity to become more and more powerful. So, regulated religion, no more freedom of religion, or at least it is a limited freedom of religion, because you can still choose your faith, but all faiths are connected to the greater good within coalition borders. Another fun thing that happened was attempt at mining stars. And here is the best thing. The mining of stars isn't something I made up. Mining stars, or attempts of mining stars, is canonical thing Games Workshop introduced in the Tau Empire lore. So all fans of the Imperium and other factions that think that I'm going too far, sorry my darlings, this is canonical part of the Tau Empire, and I'm keeping it because it's fun and because I want to spite you a little bit. But let's talk about how the very idea of mining stars came to be. With discoveries related to the light sphere, you probably remember it was the piece of technology found within the Campageddon, the giant space hulk, a concept of mining stars became a real project. Coalition needed resources. Stars could supply them with more than they had any way of using, ensuring almost endless supply and great growth for the coalition in the future. Despite many technological advances and optimism of the Earthcast and other scientists of the coalition, 4 attempts that were very expensive ended in failure, each star turning into a supernova, destroying entire star systems. When it was clear that while the project had some merit, it wasn't based in fantasy, the coalition technology wasn't advanced enough to mine stars, at least for now. But when project was about to be put on the shelf, Firecast, Ethereals and Psyker species of the coalition found a new purpose for the project. Because the 4th attempt happened just months before the second pulse, and the entire project was put on hold during the war, as all the resources that would be needed for this project were redirected to the front lines. But after the war, it was discovered that core systems of the Sion Empire were corrupted to a great degree. Even with the planets cracked into pieces, the corruption of chaos was still present, and threat of demons returning was very much a possibility. It was then when the coalition decided to check if this technology of attempting of mining stars that ended with failure and caused stars to go supernova could be directed. If the failure of forcing a star to go supernova could be controlled. The results of this project remain secret, but it is clear that all three major core systems of the old Sion Empire were destroyed, their stars going supernova. However, it isn't known if it was accomplished in controlled fashion, or did the entire thing slipped out of a high command control, making it useless as offensive weapon, one that couldn't be used in war. After all, there is a reason why grenades explode after few seconds after you pull the pin. I doubt there is any soldier on this planet that would choose to take a grenade that has a power to destroy 20 tanks at once, but they don't know if grenade will explode in 1 second after he pulls a pin, or in 12 years. And it isn't known if Coalition managed to force a star to go supernova in controlled way, or if they were forcing it until it finally exploded. Now, let's talk about something different, because I did talk about colonization during the period of time, during the age of security. But I prefer to talk about the all four septs and how big the coalition became at the end of this age of security. So I didn't talk about it, well, before I finished talking about the 6th coalition war. I also did some changes to the map. One you could most likely already noticed, and now the map should be easier to read, or at least I hope so. So, what septs were established in this period of time? The first sept is Abba Renai, a sept world established within Krut space. It was created as a fortress shipyard sept to boost productivity, defenses, and naval production in the region. Zervera, while it kept its position as main administration sept within Krut space, it became mostly military world, and it would take a long time for it to return to full splendor after the damage it took during the 5th Coalition War. Abha Renai was established to balance it out with naval production and to help build up naval power in this region of space. It was also a clear indication that in future expansions, the territories of the Krut, or well, beyond the Perdus Rift, would be expanded, and Coalition would have a need for more than one proper sept in the region to support the colonization effort. The next sept that was established was Kibo Aha, sept world established on the border of the Frozen Storm, mainly to study the wonder of this great anomaly, but more importantly to act as additional line of defense if septs closer to the border of a third sphere of expansion in the east were to fall in future wars. What might be surprising, this became a religious sept, where ideology of the greater good and numerous faiths of member species were studied and fused for the sake of unity and cohesion. As you remember, I was talking about the regulation of religion. This sept was the heart, the center of those regulated faiths. This is where this new way of teaching faith was created. Next one on the list is 440. It was established near the Broken Heart, directly on the path that orcs took when they moved towards the core of the coalition. It was created as something which could be recognized as a forge world, or at least as close as coalition could manage. 440 was built with intention of being the greatest manufacturing world which could arm entire armies. One that could be fed on newly discovered wealth of numerous planets and asteroid fields that were very close to the border of a Broken Heart. Apparently, with new technological advancements, the coalition could get closer to the border of a Broken Heart without direct danger. And with that, they gained access to many resources that were right on the border of this anomaly. 440 was created to utilize this wealth. In future ages, 440 will be known as one of the greatest producer of goods, weapons and machines delivered to coalition member species, as well as potential allies beyond their borders. The last sept that was established in this period of time was Chu Tik Sei, a sept established directly at the border of a third sphere of expansion between the Centra and Mekian homeworlds. And it was mostly created as a standard sept world. A good mix of production, population, and industry. And looking at it simply was nothing out of ordinary. In truth, however, it was meant as a main operating base for future expansion in the northern direction, as well as a fortress in the path of any threat coming from the direction of the Silent Bay. Silent Bay being the place where a lot of orcs escaped and were found dead, without anyone to be called responsible. So the question is, what was the state of the coalition by the end of the first age of security? Well, the coalition had 38 members. They also had 36 sept worlds. And it possessed 478 worlds, with 84 of those worlds being outposts. If you remember from the previous episode, outposts are relatively small colonies that aren't self-sufficient and are tasked only with delivering one or two very specific goods. And I did say that Coalition established quite a lot of them when they were establishing full colonies and new septs. And they established 84 of them. But in terms of worlds that were colonized in one way or the other, the coalition grew by 108 worlds, which is a lot, but remember that this took around 700 Terran years and well over 800 Tau years. And out of those 108 worlds, 84 were outposts. The remaining 24 worlds that were established were both sept worlds and self-sufficient colonies. Less than a fourth of newly added worlds in this period of time could be considered colonies by all definitions in matters of colonization by the coalition. The coalition, without a doubt, grew wealthy and powerful during this period of time. But there was a moment when it was decided that enough of sitting around. It's time to expand once again. And so, exactly 1,000 years after the victory in the Fifth Coalition War, the coalition declared start of the fourth sphere of expansion. But this is a story for another time. Well, my darlings, that's it for today. The entirety of the First Age of Security and the Sixth Coalition War is behind us. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, the whole shtick. This episode introduces a lot of significant changes to the Tauva Coalition, which make them look even more different compared to the Tau Empire. The regulated religion, the fact that they fought demons and demons of Slaanesh to boot, the fact that Coalition has a full genocide behind their belt. It's not a small thing. I am not counting genociding of orcs because, well, it isn't the same. I showed you how the 40th millennium started for the Coalition, and I hope that what I prepared for the fourth sphere of expansion will be to your liking. We are moving quite fast to the ending of my script. I am not sure how many episodes will come out of my writing of my notes, but I think we are within 5 episodes at the worst case scenario till the end of this series, when I reach the moment when the Damocles Gulf Crusade starts. After finishing this series, this playlist, I will go on a little hiatus. I will prepare a nutshell series for newcomers that could, well, just eat the entire history of a coalition in very condensed form, like extremely condensed, to the point that they will have to go through this series if they want to find more, and a nutshell episode talking about every single member species of the coalition, for which I have something in the works. Something that should bring a lot of joy to the fans of 40k and Tau Empire in general. After that, I will start the rewrite of the Damocles Gulf Crusade. I don't know how long it will take, because I have some notes, but with how my style evolves now as I'm recording, I will have to make some grand changes to the story in some places, or change the way our I narrate things here and there. Adapt my notes to my current style of recording. But this is a matter for another time. I apologize for mumbling, but I want to keep you updated about my plans. With all that out of the way, I thank you for joining me today, and I hope you enjoyed. Now, my dear listeners, remember, wherever you are, whatever you do, try to enjoy yourself while you can. I wish you most heretical day. Ta-ta!